ordered now by executive order, the unconstitutional executive orders. So, okay. Here we go. His executive orders are as follows. The ATF is to require that any business that engage in the sale of guns have to obtain a federal license to do so and conduct background checks. Completely unconstitutional. We just went over the Constitution. There are no provisions in there for background checks. There's no requirement that you have to get federal approval to have a gun. Under that same provision, failure to obtain a license to sell will carry criminal penalties of up to 5 years in prison, 5 years, and a fine of up to $250,000. Okay, next. There also have to be background checks for trusts, corporations, and other legal entities. Okay, whatever, fine. Don't need to go into any more detail on that. There will be greater communications between federal and state authorities on criminal history information. Okay, whatever. But the Constitution does not say that if you're a criminal, you can't have a gun. So, again, unconstitutional. He instructs the FBI to overhaul the background check system to make it more efficient and accurate. Improvements include increasing personnel by 50%. Okay, so you're going to hire more FBI agents. So what are you going to do with those, Barry? I mean, they're principal culprits in all these false flag events. The country's broke, and now you're going to spend more money on unconstitutional laws that restrict the Second Amendment. Give me a break. Increase funding for the ATF for the hiring of 200 new ATF agents and investigators to help enforce existing gun laws. Well, again, why are there gun laws at all? The Constitution does not have any ifs, ands, or buts. It just says that you have a right to own guns. So, again, you're hiring 200 more ATF agents to help enforce unconstitutional laws for a broke country that has no money. Okay, got it. He wants the Attorney General to encourage federal U.S. attorneys to work with state and local authorities and groups to increase prevention of domestic violence and to prevent prohibited persons from obtaining firearms. Okay, this is something I know a little bit about. I used to do quite a few divorces when I was an attorney, and many of them would include false allegations of domestic violence. It was a he said, she said thing, and the judges would usually keep them in place because they felt it was the conservative way to approach things, to keep the two of them apart. But what Barry's going to do here, Barry is going to look up who's ever had a personal protection order. And by the way, there was one lawyer in particular I knew. He would tell all of his female clients to go get a personal protection order, make up stories, so they would get to stay in the house during the pendency of the case. These are the kind of games you see in personal protection orders. But now, all those records are going to be used against you to keep you from having your Second Amendment constitutional rights. Okay, moving on. The Department of Health and Human Services will finalize a rule removing legal barriers preventing states from reporting relevant information about people prohibited from possessing a gun for specific mental health reasons. Well, there's a reason Barry had his Obamacare passed, and so you're starting to see it, because it had nothing to do with making medical costs cheaper. It had to do with getting access to all of your medical records so Barry could use them to deny you your Second Amendment rights. Now, what they're talking about here with mental health records, what you're going to see is military members being denied their rights to have guns. These types of patriotic people are just the ones the federal government is most scared of. Many of them come back from the Middle East with post-traumatic stress disorder, and their records are now on file with the federal government. And those records are now going to be used to keep guns away from the very people protecting the country. Disgusting. But that's exactly what Barry is. Okay. Well, before we move on, we're headed here for a break. So let's take our break. We'll come back and talk about this. And then we're going to talk about the actions taken by Governor Abbott in Texas before we wrap up today. You're listening to Real Investigations with Kurt Haskell. We will be right back after this break. Hang tight. Welcome back to Real Investigations with Kurt Haskell. When we left off, we were talking about President Obama's executive orders to take away your gun rights and illegally strip you of your Second Amendment constitutional rights to possess a gun. Let's move on. Here's another directive from Mr. Obama. His executive order will require inclusion of mental health information from the Social Security Administration in the background check system before you can possess a firearm. So, we've already had that people getting a divorce won't be able to get a gun. We've already had military won't be able to get a gun, many of them anyway. And now we have old people won't be able to get a gun. So a lot of times, older people getting Social Security, again, I have experience with this, will appoint someone that can manage their money because they have a hard time getting around, what have you. They're in a wheelchair. They're old, right? Maybe they want their kids to do their banking for them. But now, Obama is going to look at this information and use it to say, well, that you're not fit to have a gun. And that's exactly what's going on here. So while these provisions seem to be okay on their face, they're not. I mean, you're talking about big groups, big percentages of the population that won't be able to have guns. Okay, let's move on. There are a few more. The Department of Defense, Justice Department, and Homeland Security will be directed to conduct or sponsor research into gun safety technology to reduce the likelihood of accidental discharge, discharge of a firearm, whatever. Okay, so more jobs for worthless idiots. How are you going to stop guns from accidentally discharging 100% of the time? I didn't know this was such a big problem. Retarded, if you ask me. Anyway, state attorneys will be, Attorney General will be directed to focus resources on eliminating the most dangerous and impactful cases in illegal gun trafficking and violent offenders who bypass the background check system and purchase guns illegally. Isn't that amazing? Because wasn't former Attorney General Holder caught in trafficking guns illegally over the border in Mexico? But Obama wants to crack down on people in the states doing it. So what he's doing here is clearing out the competition. So only the feds can control the illegal gun market like they do with the illegal drug market. Just, knocking out competition for their business is what Barry's doing here. And then the last one, remove legal barriers preventing states from reporting your medical information, especially about people with mental illness. So again here, Barry wants all your health information so he can decide whether you're fit to have a gun. Now, who's to determine if you have a mental illness? We've already seen truthers, patriots, birthers, libertarians, NRA members, whatever, fall under the definition of domestic terrorists now. So now you're only one step away from domestic terrorists being labeled mentally ill. And who's to make that determination? Well, it's your federal government and Barry Obama himself. So you can see where this is going. These people are going to be declared to have a mental illness of some sort and won't be able to have guns. So old people, no guns. Former military, no guns. Divorce, no guns. Patriots, no guns. Truthers, no guns. You can see what's going to happen with this. Common sense. Gun provisions. Common sense. Yeah. Sure it is, Barry. Go through the legal means, Barry. Okay, if you can't tell, I'm quite fed up with Barry Obama, and he's actually a big part of the reason I left the United States. So I'm not the only one fed up with Barry Obama, because Texas Governor Greg Abbott this week did something kind of unusual, and what he did was he proposed 9 constitutional amendments to restore the rule of law and return the Constitution to its intended purposes. Kind of interesting. Someone to come out and take a stand like this. So Abbott further went on and called for a constitutional convention of states, spearheaded by Texas, his state, which would amend the U.S. Constitution to take power away from the federal government run amok. I approve. Okay. Abbott said that the increasingly frequent departures from constitutional principles are destroying the rule of law foundation on which this country was built. I agree completely. He goes on further. The irony for our generation is that the threat to our republic doesn't come just from foreign enemies. It comes in part from our very own leaders. I agree. So let's look at what he's proposing here. Kind of interesting, some of them. His amendments, number 1, prohibit Congress from regulating activity that occurs wholly within one state. I like this one because this is kind of going back on the 10th Amendment states' rights kind of argument that were basically taken away when Abraham Lincoln got a little power hungry during the Civil War. And the 10th Amendment's been dead since, really. So this would kind of restore this sort of states' rights power. You know, when I think of what the U.S. was set up to be, it's kind of, how I think of it is a very weak federal government, very few federal laws, and each state kind of makes their own laws on most things. So if you don't like what's going on in one state, you can move to another one. Or maybe the people are similar to you and the laws are similar to you, with very few laws that are uniform throughout the United States. And that's kind of how I think it was meant to be. It's not what it is. It's completely the opposite. But this would be a step in the right direction to restoring that. Anyway, let's move on. Require Congress to balance its budget. Of course. This is one of the main things I ran on in my congressional campaign of 2012. How can you have a continually unbalanced budget, continually running up a deficit, stealing money from the people through inflation by the excessive money printing that's going on, to pay for a budget that's not balanced? Next one, prohibit administrative agencies from creating federal law. I agree. I don't know how they're allowed to do that at all right now. Federal law should only be created by Congress and the Senate, like the Constitution provides. Next, prohibit administrative agencies from preempting state law. Again, this is another provision where he's attempting to give states more rights here, and I would agree with this too. Next, allow 2/3 majority of the states to override a Supreme Court decision. That's kind of interesting too, because lately we've seen some cases in the Supreme Court that I think a majority of the states would override, and specifically I'm thinking about, 2/3 majority would override something like Obamacare. I mean, I can't see many states approving that at all. I mean, it's turned out to be a complete farce. People's premiums have gone way up. They're getting no benefit from this, most people. I think that would be good. You know, and when it reached the Supreme Court, you had John Roberts bending over backwards to make this law legal when it's anything but. So I think that would be good too. The next one, require a 7-justice supermajority vote for U.S. Supreme Court decisions that invalidate a democratically enacted law. Interesting. So, not sure I agree with this 100%. I mean, what if you have some laws, you know, like racist laws or gender-based laws that are enacted somewhere but not really fair. You need 7 Supreme Court justices to vote for it, to have it thrown out. Yeah, maybe. I'd have to know more about it. Okay. Restore the balance of power between the federal and state governments by limiting the former to the powers expressly delegated to it in the Constitution. Of course. I don't know how this country has gotten so far away from the original intent of what it was supposed to be. It's the complete opposite of what it's supposed to be. The federal government is supposed to hardly have any powers at all, and now it's the opposite. The federal government uses orders, withholds money, provides money. You know, it's pulling the purse strings here from the states to get them to do certain things. So I agree completely. Number 8, give state officials the power to sue in federal court when federal officials overstep their bounds. This one sounds good on its face, but the problem I would have would be your